Alrighty, so thank you all for coming tonight. We are here to talk a little bit about the MCAT car section. This is our first in a series of classes, seminars, webinars, whatever you want to call them, that is going to delve into the car section on Tuesday nights and the science sections on Thursday nights. You can feel free to come to all of them. Some of them, I am recording them for the first time this time through, as I want them to be more accessible over time. But do not think of these as recordings you're just going to go to and like listen to after the fact and it have as much impact, because these are at its heart an interactive session. Because I'm going to be asking you questions, and I'm going to expect that you guys are going to answer, and also expect that you guys ask me questions so that we can get the most out of this. In fact, the passage that I just provided, we'll work on that later. I'm going to give you guys some time to do the passage, and we're going to look at some of the strategies that you guys can use to approach MCAT passages, CARS passage specifically. Today is just sort of an intro to like get our feet wet, start getting us into what is MCAT CARS all about. So first things first, let me ask this question. How many people here have taken an MCAT practice test at this point? You can chat in the chat box, or you can use the hand feature. Looks like maybe 50-50 going on in there. Maybe more like 25-75 now, 25 yes and 75 no. So it's okay to be that ratio right now. That's actually what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks, is taking a practice test, a mock test. You should be able to sign up for that right now on the test prep website. And the link will be here at the end, so don't worry, we'll give you that link. Taking a practice test is good. Taking lots of practice tests is even better. Lots and lots of practice is where you will really improve. So without further ado, let's talk about the CARS section. So the first thing to really start investing yourself in is how does the MCAT work, and where does the CARS section fit in? So I know there's probably been some confusion about how long the MCAT is and what's the structure because of the COVID nightmare of a test. I will say that the AAMC has gone back to, for next year, the original version of the test. They're going to be doing the normal 8-hour version. There's going to be no confusion about which version of the test we're going to be taking. So the 6-hour COVID test is not going to be a thing during 2021. Knock on wood. It should be just a normal 8-hour test. It does start, by the way, at either 7:30 a.m. or 3 p.m. So you will have to deal with those alternate testing times. It's honestly better than 6 a.m. and noon and whatever it was, 6:30 p.m. or some crazy time like that. That was just nuts. So they're just going to be administering it twice a day. So where does the MCAT, or where does the CARS section come into the MCAT? So once you start the test, you're going to be doing this 10-minute optional tutorial. I do say that you should start the tutorial. You don't have to do the tutorial, because at this point, you're in the real test. Have you done a practice test yet? Hopefully several. I want people to be taking upwards of 10 practice tests before you walk into your real test, because when you do that, you're going to feel more confident. You're going to understand how this thing works. What's the tutorial for? It's honestly just to get yourself settled, set your feet down, get your computer monitor straightened, get the mouse where you need it to, put your scratch paper and pen, or if they're using a board and whiteboard marker, have that set up, relax, adjust your seat, do all that fun stuff to get yourself comfortable. One of the biggest things about the MCAT as a whole is it's a stamina test. And if you're not comfortable, you're going to have a harder time focusing. So get comfortable. Use that optional tutorial to do that. Next up comes the 95-minute Chem Phys section. We're not going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about that on Thursday. Then we have a 10-minute optional break. Take all your breaks, guys. I know if you skip the breaks and you jump through these things, you get out sooner. But again, this is a stamina test. You need those times to blank your mind, to go just stare at the wall for a minute and just don't think about anything. So you sort of reboot during these breaks. And you also want to have snacks for the break times. A good snack, you don't want to have a heavy meal. Like, I know people look at it like, oh, it's lunchtime, let's have a meal. No. Even during your 30-minute break, we're going to see in a second, I want you to stick to just snacks that are high in protein and high in complex carbs, low in sugars, low in those simple carbs, and low in fats, because those things will slow you down. Protein and complex carbs will speed you up. They'll actually help you stay focused for a longer period of time, right? So what you put in your body during this test will definitely affect how you feel later on. Plus, go to the bathroom. You don't want to be partway through the car section going like, oh man, I should have gone to the bathroom. So even if there's a line, the test is not going to go on without you. Just go to the bathroom and it'll be fine. I mean, honestly, there probably won't be as much of a line this year or this coming year because there's going to be less people at any given time taking the test. So there you go. That's helpful. Then you get into your 90 minutes car section. The cars is 90 minutes shorter. I know it's 5 minutes shorter. It's 90 minutes total, and then the science sections. So it's a little bit different in structure. Thankfully, it comes before the break. You don't have to worry about going into that long break, maybe have a food coma feeling when you're going into the car section. That's the bio section that comes after that 30-minute break. Then, because that'll be when you get to the biochem. You get your optional 10-minute break there, and then you get psych-soc, then you get a 5-minute void question. This is the shiny red button of the test. How are you going to feel when you get to this button? You're going to feel awesome that you did great, or are you going to feel like you just got beat up? Most people are going to feel beat up. Some people will feel both, and some people will feel like, I did great, I'm done, woohoo. But for the most part, you're going to feel kind of like, maybe I didn't do so well. And this is not the time to trust your judgment on how well you did on the test. I know it's very tempting to click the void button because it makes it as if you didn't take the test. It still counts as one of your attempts, but no score will be listed, and so the schools won't see it. And the only reason I've seen any really good solid need to press the shiny red void button is basically you're just extraordinarily ill, like you are so ill it's disrupted you had to get up and go to the bathroom, things like that. Or there's a testing site problem, like the power goes out for 2-3 hours. Like if the power goes out for 2-3 hours, they're going to keep you there, and they are going to make you sit there without your cell phone and wait, not talk to anybody, and then restart the test where it left off. You might even have to do some questions over again. Are you going to be in your right mind when that happens? Probably not. Like, these are things that have happened to students of mine. So like, that's the only time I think the void button is really valid, because they are not going to call that a testing abnormality because they were able to get the test going again. So what's the take home point? Should you really be thinking about pressing the void button? Probably not. I want you guys to make that like totally last ditch thing you would ever do in case something really gnarly happened during the test. Then you got a survey. This is the first thing I'm going to tell you. You don't need to do the survey. If you want to do it, do it. If you don't, leave, because then you get to go home. So survey, no survey, who really cares? So that's the structure of this test. The car section, thankfully, is before you get too worn out. You're only doing one section. Yes, it's Chem Phys, which is most people's least favorite section, second only to cars. But at least you get the hardest, quote unquote, stuff out of the way before lunch. And I think that's a pretty good thing. Now, the critical analysis and reasoning skills is what this is called. And this is because when you have standardized tests, they create documents that outline the structure of the test. And so the things they're testing you on are the critical analysis and reasoning skills. Everybody just calls it CARS because it's just easier, because it's not much of a mouthful. So the first of those is the Foundations of Comprehension. there's going to be 30% of the test is going to be those types of questions. You're going to basically be inferring meaning from context. Like, it's basically reading comprehension at its core, understanding what's in the text itself. So I usually refer to these as retrieval type questions. The information is there, you just got to go find it and pull it out and use it to answer a question. And the answer is one of these pieces of information. The answers are probably going to be paraphrased or something like that. The second skill they're touching on is reasoning within the text. This is saying, okay, here's some piece of information from the test, from the passage, and now I have to use it to explain something in the question. I'm not just taking the information and plopping it down as my answer. I'm taking the information, figuring out what answer is best because of this information. So these are probably the medium type questions. 30% of the questions are this type, 15 to 16 total questions in the section. These are the ones where number one, you got to go find the information, and number two, you have to apply the information to make some kind of judgment. Reasoning beyond the text are the questions that happen the most often, and they are also the hardest questions. 40% of the questions, or 21 to 22 questions, are going to be this type of question. And these are going to be the hardest because what you will usually see is they'll give you brand new information in the question stem, brand new, you've never seen it before, and you have to use something from the passage to explain the new information or to understand the new information. So this is where you're going to be applying or extrapolating the text information into some new paradigm given in the question, or assessing, like, okay, if this happened, what would the author believe? Something like that. So these are the hardest questions overall, and there's more of them than the rest. So they're the hardest just because you've got to do stuff with the information now. So you can see they're kind of emphasizing less of the retrieval and emphasizing more of the get the info, now use it. That's what CARS is really about, application of the info. So doing good reading comprehension and then going the next step. They also split it up into humanities versus social sciences, about 50-50. The only quote unquote sciences from the test that are going to be in the CARS section, you might see a psychology or sociology passage, but they're not going to be asked in a scientific perspective. They're going to be asked in a reading comprehension perspective. Sometimes people find that the content of the passage is difficult. I personally find, like, if it's a passage about art history or something of the sort, my brain turns off. So, like, you can make decisions based on the content sometimes of, do I want to do this passage now or later? And we'll talk about cherry picking your passages. So how much time do you have in the section? We said overall we have 90 minutes, and it's made up of 9 passages. The bulk of the passages will have 6 questions and 7 questions. There'll be 1, maybe 2 passages with 5 questions. It's usually all 6s and 7s and a 5, because you have 53 questions total in the section. So how much time do I have per question? How much time do I have per passage? If you think it on a passage by passage basis, it's actually very straightforward. If I just want to work 90 minutes, 9 passages, how much time on average per passage should I be spending? $10 minutes. And you'll hear me refer to that as the 10-minute pace. So if you hear me saying the 10-minute pace, that just means I'm saying let's average it across it. Now, that's an average. Each passage you might spend more or less time on it because there's more or less questions. So if I'm working a 5-question passage, I want to get in the habit of spending only about 8.5 minutes on that passage. And what that is, there's a formula that I use to create that 8.5. It's so, like, what's once I take away 4 minutes, what's left over? Not from the 10-minute passage pace, but the 8.5-minute passage pace. If I take away 4 minutes from 8.5 minutes, what's left over? 4.5 minutes. How much time per question is that? little over a minute, right? So that's really what I'm using here is you're going to spend about a minute per question, maybe a little bit more, and you're going to spend the bulk of your time working the passage, reading parts of the passage, using the passage. And that's a good sort of habit to get into. And you can think of it by, like, if I got a 6-minute passage, I'm going to add 1.5 minutes, or 6-question passage. I'm going to work that one in 10 minutes. And if I'm working a 7-question passage, I'm going to work that one in 11.5 minutes. So it's kind of just this rough number that you want to shoot for. If you don't finish a passage in 11.5 minutes, okay, big deal. You went a little long. It just means you're going to have to go quicker on another one. Let me bring up a very important skill to learn here, though. Some people are just slower readers than other people, and that is perfectly okay. To get a good score on the MCAT, you're looking at about a 120, like to get an average score on the MCAT for getting into med school, 128 per section. Like that's or 512 overall. 512 is the average for matriculants on the MCAT. You don't need to get the average, by the way. You can get a 508 and be perfectly fine. You can have a 506 and be perfectly fine getting into MD school. But the average is 512. So if you're shooting for that for a target, you want a 128 on every section. Let me tell you the secret. If you do 8 passages and you do them really well with high accuracy, can you get a 128? Yeah, you totally can. So what I'm suggesting, and I want you all to realize this, is if you're struggling severely with trying to get all of the 9 passages done, you could work at an 8-passage pace. Do 8 passages really, really well, and then just guess like A for the last passage. You can still obtain a 128 readily on this thing. You do not have to answer all 9 passages well to get a 128. To get above a 128 you do, but to get to a 128, you could answer 8 of the 9 passages. So if you're really struggling with time, I would suggest you consider that as an option. And like saying, I'm just going to do 8 passages. I'm going to skip the ugliest passage, the one that I really don't understand, and I'm just going to guess on it. That's okay to do. And if you have even a few minutes left, you could look at it and say, well, maybe I'll do this in this question because I understand those. It's all about strategy, like learning how to approach this instead of just going in and just like doing question 1. Like, how many people find this familiar? Do question 1, then I'm going to do question 2, then I'm going to do question 3, but question 3 is hard. Oh man, question 3. I'm still going to do question 3. Oh, question 3. Man, I don't. All right, I'll move on to question 3. And so, like, you can't let go of question 3, right? Like, you're stuck in this linear test taking thing, and that's one thing to practice is learning how to skip. And once you feel the freedom of skipping a question or skipping a passage, you will never go back. Like, I was that way for the longest time. I was a type A test taker, every question in a row until I, got in my 20s. And once in my 20s, I was like, I'll try it. And like once I started it, I was like, oh, cool. I just skip all over the place. I'm doing this one, I'll skip that question, and coming back, and like because I'm not stressed out about one question, the whole test goes better. It's amazing. Learn how to skip. You can even skip whole passages. You can skip individual questions. So what are the tools you have available to you on the test? Number 1, there's a timer. This is the devil tool, if you ask me. Most people get super hyper focused on the timer if you notice it's there. So try to ignore the timer as much as possible. What you want to build over time is your ability to gauge how long you're spending on a passage or a question without actually looking at a clock. So practice with time up instead of time down, like a timer that's not going to, have that constant like tick, 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 tick in your mind going on. See how long it takes you and then figure out, okay, I need to shave some time off, like, because I took 100 minutes to do instead of 90. So let me just speed up doing these little tasks and then use the time up timer again. You want to be able to time it unconsciously without having to stare at that thing because it's bad. You also have a highlighting tool, and not only can you use it with the mouse, but you can also use quick keys. Some of you guys like the quick keys, Alt-H, some of you don't. So your choice, but use the highlighting tool. We'll talk about that today. You have the strikeout tool, which is Alt-S. You can flag a question for review, and that's what I would do if you skip a question. Skip a question, give it an answer, flag it. That way you can come back from the navigation screen, which is Alt-V, or the navigation button, and go back to those flagged questions. It'll be easier to find them. You can back up through the questions with previous or Alt-P. You can go forward with Alt-N or the next button. And there's a periodic table, which hopefully you're not using on the on the car section. I believe you can still bring it up while you're in the car section, which I think is a really weird feature. Scratchboard and wet erase marker, although if they're doing what they did this round, during the COVID year, they went back to paper and pen at most testing centers, at least temporarily, because of the extra effort of sanitizing the scratchboard and the wet erase markers in between sections and stuff like that. So you should probably practice with pen and paper some of the time, and practice with get like a whiteboard, one of those small whiteboards, and a wet erase marker, which is like a Visa V marker, and or you can get like laminated cardstock or something like that, and practice with that. It's very messy, so you want to get used to what that messy thing is. Noise reduction headphones. Again, though, these, even in a non-COVID year, these were a pain in the butt. These things are like one size fits absolutely nobody, and they're really heavy, and they sort of clamp down on your head, and they're noise reduction, they're not noise canceling. So all it is basically a big heavy pair of earmuffs, like those things that people at the airport wear when they're working on the planes. You could bring your own sealed foam earplugs. They have to be in a hermetically sealed package. Before you walk in with them in the hermetically sealed package, you have to open them up in front of them, so they know that they're not got a little earwig in there or something like that. And nowadays you can't go anywhere without your mask, so you will go there and they will inspect your mask. What you'll do is you'll hold it up to them and you'll flip it over, kind of like when you hold up the earplugs to them so they can visually inspect them, because they're not touching this stuff right now, thankfully. The one thing that I would be aware of outside of these test tools right now is there's going to be space between each carrel. So like the way they set the testing centers up, you're going to be like, it's going to be you at a computer, then a computer carrel with nobody in it, then another carrel with somebody in it, or maybe every third one is going to be filled. So that's the one sort of difference in the testing room that it's going to be. And then the handprint, you're going to have to handprint in, handprint out, handprint in, handprint out. It's kind of like going to jail. They will sanitize the handprint thing in between every person that touches it, so that we don't have to worry about transmission of viruses and whatnot, or other grossness for that matter. Now, that's all sort of the generic things. Any questions so far before we jump into like, what are some strategies you could use in general on the section? Nothing so far? All right. Seems like we're cruising. All right. So let's talk about, note taking. What about note taking? That's actually a little bit of kind of what I address here with some of the strategies. Note taking on passages, or what I usually refer to as annotation, annotating, that has to be done all on your scratchboard or scratch paper. There's no way to take notes on the computer screen. So you have to do it on paper, and that's something you want to get used to doing whenever you're doing practice. So like tonight, for example, when we look at that passage, you should have an extra piece of paper like out to the side. Don't print the thing and then write on it. Whenever you're doing practice, anything MCAT, if you have printed practice problems, don't write on the problems. Write on a scratch paper, because you're going to have to take your notes there. You're going to have to do your work there. You can't write on the questions themselves. So I hope, does that address what you were thinking there? All righty. So let's look at a couple ways. I'm not going to commit to a single strategy today, nor am I ever going to commit to a single strategy, because literally everybody is different. The way people get better at cars is discovering the strategy that works for you. So let's talk, like, how do I pick a strategy? Just pick one. Pick one that seems like it might work, and then iterate it. You try it. If it works, great. figure out the thing that works the worst, switch it, fix that one thing, change the way you do it, and then try it. If it works, great, that improved. If it didn't work, if you got worse, then switch it back. Be scientists about this. I'm really not a big fan of just saying, hey, Princeton Review or Kaplan or Jack Weston or any of these companies out there and just like saying, I'm going to do their process. Because if you do their process, it works for them, but it may not work for you. And this is why I like to dabble in looking at and exploring different strategies and taking, I'm going to take this piece from this strategy and this piece from this strategy and try this together. So, and I want you guys to think that way when you're doing your studying. There's not one magic strategy to get better at cars. What it is working until you find one process that works for you really well, and then adapting that process to different types of passages. So overall in the section, one of the things you can work on, you can try, is what I call ranking. You'll see this in a lot of the standard strategies out there as well. Rank a passage as now, later, or never. Because you can, as you go, decide, am I going to do this passage now? Am I going to skip it and do it later? Or is this going to be my never passage? I'm going to do that one at the end, and I'm just going to guess, and all that fun stuff. So what are some things that go into that? A hard passage is probably going to have more or less questions in it. Actually, yeah, less questions, generally speaking. And these are generalizations, guys. Don't like take these as laws. That's the other thing to think about strategy too, is when you learn a strategy, you've got to say to yourself, this works most of the time. Sometimes you're going to have to change up your strategy on the fly. But less questions is actually usually harder because they don't throw in the easy questions when you have less questions. So they're usually more of the beefy questions when there's less of them, like the ratio. When you get to like a 7-question passage, a couple of them are probably pretty cheesy, pretty like just really like, oh yeah, it's an easy question. Long paragraphs and wordy questions, usually harder. That's going to be pretty much the word of the day. If the paragraphs are, sorry, if the questions are paragraphs, it's probably a hard passage. If the paragraphs, if there's only 2 paragraphs in the whole passage, it's probably a hard section. So you can make some of these judgment calls as you go. Another thing, and we're going to talk about these SIRs as like SIRs 1, 2, and 3. SIRs 1 was the retrieval type. SIRs 2 and 3 were the ones where you have to use the information for something else. If you see most of this style of question as you're going through the passage, it's probably a harder passage. What about the subject matter? If it's like, if the subject is for you like watching paint dry, is it a harder or easier passage? It's a harder passage because if you're not interested in it, it's harder for you to focus on it. It's harder for you to make sense of it. Sorry, I'm pausing for a moment until the dogs pass. Okay, sorry about that. Had the trash people. Actually, I misspoke. That's actually supposed to be cars, not SIRS. So that's a typo on the slide. Thank you for catching that. SIRS is actually something we're going to be talking about in the sciences, because they have what they call scientific inquiry and reasoning skills. So it's the equivalent in the science sections to the cars. So they have very similar setup. So this one's supposed to read cars because it's the cars class today. So, but yes, the cars 2 and 3 are going to be the harder questions. Yes. And I'll let you see them after we finish today. So we'll do that. I usually do 3 passes through the section. I will go through the forward direction and go like look at all the passages as I go and do the now passages as I hit them. So if I find passage 1 is easy, then I'll do passage 1 first. So I'm like skipping through the questions, and I'll do the passage 1 questions first. I'll skip passage 2, then I'll do passage 3 and 4, and then might do 5, skip 5 and 6, and then I'll go backwards and do my later passages. It's by just like skipping through the questions, go previous, 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 previous. And then I will skip through in the forward direction again and catch all those things that I skipped, I left blank, whatever. And I'll just check through all my answers. This is one possible strategy for going through the section. Do you have to do it this way? No. I will say the one thing that I see people balk at doing this is that they think it takes an exorbitant amount of time. It really doesn't, because you're actively doing things while you're passing through these passages and making decisions. You're actually using your time wisely, and at the end, it saves you from doing other things. So at the end of the day, it's worth the investment in time. And that's a lot of what you got to do with your car strategies is say, if I invest this time, is it worth it? And maybe it is for you, maybe it isn't for you. So you got to make those kind of decisions. Okay, what about the passage level? What are some of the things you can do? And I'm going to give 2 possibilities here that we could try. So the first thing I suggest all of you do is read the reference at the bottom of the passage. And people forget it's down there. What's the reference going to tell you about the passage? It can tell you the title of the paper. It can tell you what the subject is. What else could it tell you? In these passages, like, you're not going to see journals. The journals, that would be the science passages. For cars, we're not going to be noticing that kind of thing. The date. So sometimes date can be informative because it can tell you what style of language it might be. If it's written in the 1800s, it's going to be probably easier or harder to read. Probably harder to read because 1800s English was different than 1900s English. So author information can be surprisingly useful because if the questions are focused on like, what would the author think about this? Well, shouldn't you know who the author is? And because you could understand a little bit more about what that author might think about things. So there's where it took place. There's all these relevant things that are down there, and it's really valuable information I think people tend to overlook. So that's the first thing I would do. Go down there, read the blurb, as I say. I always call it the blurb. Read the questions and identify the question types. I'm a big fan of like making sure I know what I'm going to do before I do it. So being able to say, oh, this is this kind of question, and we're going to do a whole session on just like different ways to approach different types of questions. So read the questions first and identify their types. That'll tell me what I need to do. And then I'm not going to read the whole passage in this particular strategy. I'm just going to skim through and find the things that I identified in the questions. I'm just going to read what I need to answer the questions. So this is one approach where you do not read the whole passage. You just do some targeted reading. And then again, I do the 3 passes. I go forward through and I do my questions 1 through 6 and just do the CARS 1 questions, the retrieval, the easy questions. Then I do the CARS 2 questions, which are the basic reading within the passage or understanding within the passage. And I do those in reverse. And then I do my last pass through forward again. So I end up on the last question of the passage and I do my hardest questions. So this is a way to, again, sort of manipulate the difficulty level of how you're tackling the questions. Do the easier questions first, do the harder questions last. You could also just switch this up a little bit. Read the reference to the bottom of the passage, read and annotate the passage first. So like jump right into the passage, read it, highlight, take notes about it, understand it really well, and then go ahead and tackle the questions. So read the individual paragraphs when answering the questions. Again, so you're doing a little rereading to make sure you're answering the right thing, and then again, use 3 passes. So I included this because I wanted to show 2 alternatives. What was the real big difference between these 2 alternatives? Well, it can't be time because, why? the time is always the same. You have 10 minutes on average to do the passage. So whichever strategy you choose to do, the time has to be consistent. So if you find that one is taking you longer and the other isn't, that is a consideration. But ideally, both of these can work in the same time period. The biggest difference, I think, here is between looking and previewing the questions and getting information to jump into the passage and just get what you need versus reading the passage and taking that information to tackle the questions. In one, you're spending more time with the questions. In the other, you're spending more time with the passage. So the first one, you're spending more time with the questions because you're identifying, you're digging into the questions themselves. In the second, you're going after the passage, so you should be getting through the questions faster. So, and this is the kind of thing you have to think about when prepping for a test like this, is what strategy works to keep my time usage the best. And I use both of these, honestly. I've done both. Where I'll read and annotate a passage, or I will use the target the questions first. And like tonight, I'm going to show you targeting the questions first. Another night, I'm going to show you reading and annotating first. And like, because I think there's value in both. I think it's value in looking at different techniques and finding what works for you. The best technique is the one that makes you feel the most confident. And the one thing I want you to come out of these classes with is confidence, an abundance of confidence. Because when you're abundantly confident, what's going to happen when it comes to taking your real test? Don't leave me hanging on this one. Come on. Going to the test. Yeah, you're going to do better. Totally. You with confidence, you will perform, right? It is just the way it is. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's not, if you assume it's going to go badly and you're not confident, it goes poorly. If you assume it's going to go great, you do great. And that's what I want you all to feel like. This is the goal. I mean, who would think that I'm going to be here talking to you guys about feeling good about taking the MCAT? That's really what it comes down to. So your strategy is going to look different than both of these, because I think it should. You should find what works best for you. You should iterate your process. So you got to find your own, what's the march to your own tune, or whatever that phrase is. So how do you do this? How do you get to this place? Well, the first month of studying, let's assume we're studying for the MCAT for 3 months. For some of you, it'll be longer. For some of you, it'll be shorter. For the first month, I don't care so much about strategy. It is not time to focus on strategy. It's time to focus on getting questions right. And it's okay if you take longer than you need to in that first month to get questions right. Once you get your accuracy up and you're getting most questions correct, maybe missing one question per passage, 2 on the hardest passages, then you're ready to move on to the next phase, which is focusing on your speed. So what you want to do here is like change part of your strategy to go a little faster. And immediately your score is going to drop, right? You're not going to do as well with your accuracy, but you got to do it like 10 times in a row before the accuracy can come back up again. If you do it 10 times in a row and the accuracy is not coming back, then okay, maybe that change was not what I was supposed to do. Change it back. Let's try a different change to save time, and so on and so forth. The second month is where you should start worrying about time and speeding yourself up. The third month, once you've sort of developed that high accuracy, high focus, now it's about doing lots and lots and lots of passages in a row. Can you do well using the strategy for 9 passages at a time? So their third month is focusing on stamina. Accuracy, speed, stamina in that order. Because at the beginning, it's not important about speed. Speed is just not the thing I want you to think about. Too many people get caught up with their speed right at the beginning, and then they start manipulating their process too much, and they never do settle into a single strategy or a single set of strategies. And that's not a good mindset to be in, because again, that's where lack of confidence comes from. You're like, oh my God, my strategy, I haven't done it for very long because I just developed it, because it's, I've been iterating it so long, I don't have something consistent. Find something consistent. That's the thing. What are some strategies on the questions? We're going to have a whole section about this, but just to preface this, you're going to see Roman numerals, although not as many as they used to be. they've kind of gone away with those. There's going to be things we call 2x2s, and this is the most common question structure on the MCAT, where it's basically A and B, A not B, not A and B, or not A not B, where it's like all the 4 possible combinations of 2 things. You see that a lot, more so in the sciences, but you also see it in the cars. You're going to see what I usually refer to as 4x2s. These are the answers where like, da 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 da, yes, yes, no, no. Answer A, yes. Answer B, yes. Answer C, no. Answer D, no. And then all the reasoning is different. And so with those kinds of questions, there's a distinct strategy you want to pay attention to. There's Sesame Street questions. What do you think I mean by Sesame Street? You ever hear that song? Which one of these is not like the others? Which one of these is not the same? Which one of these is not like the others? That silly song. So a lot of times there's like one answer that just stands out, but like way different than the other 3. That answer is like really, really good, or it's really, really bad. One of the 2. That's why it's so obvious. So freaking obvious. Then we got ELNs, which are accept, least, not. Accept, least, not. And you know you've fallen for those accept, least, not questions. So, but whenever you're into these, you want to use a type appropriate strategy. So that's what I mean by look at the question and decide what kind of question it is. So you're using a good strategy for those questions. So there's like 3 layers of strategy, right? What are the 3 layers? Section, passage, and question. So you got to think about your strategy for all 3 layers. Section, passage, question. And really, I should have listed them inversely, because the real first focus is going to be question level. Like your first month is the question. Get that question strategy down. Second month is get your passage strategy down. Third month is get your section strategy down. So if you work on it in that way, you tend to be able to get there more appropriately. One thing I want to say about process of elimination, I don't want you to pick the right answer. I want you to pick the leftover answer. So the whole reason for that is what happens when you start picking answers because of their correctness? What do you think happens when you start picking answers for correctness? Yeah, they all sound correct. What you got to do is you got to look at them and say, what's wrong with this answer? Stop looking at what's right with it. Start looking at what's wrong with it. Because all it takes is one word that can make an answer incorrect. One word. So POE, man, process elimination is your best friend here. You want to come at this like every answer choice is got something wrong with it. Because when you do that, you're more likely to not fall for the traps. And that's the big key there. I also use this abbreviation once in a while. You'll hear me say answer the question. Answer the question. Not answer it, but answer this. When I say answer the question, what I'm saying is this is a question I'm totally going to skip. I don't want to skip it outright. I want to put an answer down for it. Why? Why would I put an answer down for a question that I'm going to skip? If I run out of time, I'm not going to have time to come back. And there's no guessing penalty on this test. So there's no reason you should ever leave a question blank. So that's why I have my little mnemonic, answer the question. I'm going to guess it, mark it, skip it, review it later on if I have time. Guess it, mark it, skip it, review it. Marking means use the flag tool. I used a mark instead of flag because AFSR doesn't quite have the same ring to it. And AMSR is really close to ASMR. I don't know if you always watch those videos, whatever. ASMR, AMSR, the question, answer the question.